The sun had barely begun its ascent over our quaint suburban enclave when the discordant clatter of a metal postbox being wrenched from its moorings disturbed the usual morning symphony of chirping birds and distant lawnmowers. It was a sound that heralded change, not the good kind, but the kind that leaves a bitter residue in the soul, like the aftertaste of unripe lemons. Karen was at it again. She had an impressive talent for meddling, a sort of artistry in her tyrannical management of our homeowners association. Her eyes, always the color of storm clouds, seemed to glint with a peculiar satisfaction when she spotted something I never knew what exactly that rendered my mailbox offensive to her sensibilities. Perhaps it was the gentle patina of age, a bit of rust curling like ivy along its edges, that offended her manicured sense of order. She struck early, as was her custom, perhaps on the theory that the world belonged to the early risers and the insidiously ambitious. The sight of her, a figure of starch and judgment, wielding authority like a mace, would have been comical if not for the grave seriousness with which she executed her duties. I watched from my window as she made a note on her clipboard, the modern-day scroll of decrees, each stroke of her pen as final as a gavel's strike. Her decree was swift. My mailbox, she decided, was non-compliant. Non-compliance. A word she seemed to relish, savoring its implications of rebellion and disorder. It was a decision she reached with the cool detachment of a surgeon excising a tumor, though the malady was imaginary, and the operation wholly unnecessary. I should have been angry, outraged even, at this unwarranted intrusion into my domain. But I wasn't. There was something almost serene about the absurdity of it all, like watching a bad sitcom unfold in painfully predictable episodes. I simply shook my head, an act not of resignation, but of quiet understanding. In this neighborhood drama, Karen was both villain and protagonist, and I was a curious observer, content to let the story play out. Perhaps it was a sense of peace, or maybe the stubborn refusal to let petty troubles disturb my inner harmony. But instead of retaliating, I embraced the absurdity. I replaced the mailbox, adhering to whatever arbitrary standard Karen deemed necessary, and continued with life's daily rhythms, unaffected by the tiny tempest in our suburban teapot. The irony, of course, was not lost on me. Karen, in her relentless quest for order, seemed blind to the chaos she sowed. Her actions were like a pebble thrown into a still pond, ripples spreading out, touching everyone within her reach. Yet she remained at the center, oblivious to the disturbance she caused. In the days that followed, I found solace in the small acts of defiance that required no fanfare. A cup of tea taken on the porch in the early hours, watching as the world woke up and carried on, oblivious to Karens and mailboxes alike. A silent promise to myself that my peace was not something she or anyone could revoke with a stroke of a pen. It was a quiet rebellion, a refusal to play her game, which, in a way, was the most satisfying victory of all. The mailbox stood, compliant and inconspicuous, a testament to the absurdity of it all. Life continued, undisturbed and unbothered, as I waited patiently for my turn to rewrite the narrative in a way that would be remembered. In the weeks that followed, Karen's vendetta grew like a weed in untended soil, sprawling across the landscape of our quiet neighborhood with alarming speed. Her initial attempt to revoke my mailbox had been just the beginning. Now, she seemed determined to bend the entire landscape to her will. New rules sprang up like thorn bushes in the HOA's monthly newsletter, each more absurd than the last. One morning, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. Inside was a citation for non-compliance with aesthetic harmony, a phrase that could have been plucked straight from a Kafka novel. My crime, as it were, was a garden gnome tucked discreetly amongst my marigolds. The gnome, a whimsical little thing with a chipped hat and a cheeky grin, had been a gift from my late grandmother. Now it was evidence in the court of Karen. The absurdity of it all might have been amusing if it hadn't been so infuriating. Karen's influence was spreading. Like a puppeteer, she controlled the strings of gossip that wove through the neighborhood. I could feel her eyes on me, calculating, judging, as though my mere existence were a personal affront. The air in our cul-de-sac felt heavier, laden with whispers and sidelong glances. Neighbors I once exchanged pleasantries with at the mailbox now avoided eye contact, their allegiance shifting with the prevailing wind of Karen's discontent. It was as though she had become the queen of our little kingdom, decreeing who was in favor and who was not. It was then that the real genius of my plan began to unfold. Karen's mailbox, once a shrine to her daily correspondence, stood empty each afternoon. I imagined her bewilderment, her confusion, as bills and invitations failed to materialize. How long would it be before her first complaint? A week? 2? I pictured her standing at the end of her driveway, scanning the street with hawk-like vigilance, waiting for the mail truck that would never stop. Her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the metal box, a drumbeat of frustration. It was a small victory, but a satisfying one. The day came when Karen decided to address the neighborhood at large. A notice was posted on every door, calling for an emergency HOA meeting. The language was couched in passive-aggressive politeness, but the message was clear. Karen was not pleased, and things were going to change. In the meeting, her voice was a sharp blade, slicing through objections and cutting down dissent. She spoke of standards, of harmony, and of those who disrupted the delicate balance of our community. Her gaze lingered on me, a pointed accusation wrapped in a veneer of civility. As I sat in the stiff-backed chair, listening to her diatribe, a quiet resolve settled over me. Karen's reign of pettiness would not go unchecked. There was power in subtlety, in the quiet rebellion of a skipped mailbox and a silent defiance that spoke louder than words. I would not be cowed by her tyranny. There are many ways to fight a war, and I was just getting started. The meeting concluded with her declaring a new era of compliance, an era I had no intention of joining. As we filed out, Karen caught my eye, her smile as sharp as the edge of a knife. It was a challenge, an invitation to play her game. But I had my own rules, and I intended to play by them. Days bled into each other, one stacking on top of the next like neglected leaves in an unkempt yard. Karen's absence from the neighborhood's usual gossip circles was the first sign that my little scheme had taken root. With the precision of a clock's tick, every day at 10 a.m., the mail truck would round the corner. Metal doors clanged open, envelopes were tucked into welcoming slots, and life continued for everyone else. Everyone but Karen. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, a rich symphony of unsaid words. Neighbors began to glance at each other with raised eyebrows, whispers curling between them like smoke. Mrs. Thompson, with her penchant for floral blouses, lingered longer than usual by her own mailbox, eyes flicking toward Karen's fortress of a house. Her expression was one of conspiratorial delight, the kind shared by those who don't know the full story but revel in the mystery nonetheless. I watched from my porch, the world through the filter of my sunglasses. There's a peculiar satisfaction in orchestrating chaos without leaving fingerprints. I sipped my coffee, the warmth seeping through the ceramic, grounding me in my quiet rebellion. Karen, I imagined, was tossing in her immaculate sheets. Her world, so carefully curated, was unraveling like a poorly knit sweater. There's an irony in that, I mused. The mailbox she'd sought to strip from me now stood as a sentinel of her exclusion, a fitting emblem of her downfall. The rhythm of our little street shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. Neighbors who once avoided Karen's icy glare now found reasons to linger by her driveway. The neighborhood book club, which she had commandeered with the diligence of a dictator, found new life without her pedantic interruptions. The air felt lighter, somehow. Yet, beneath the surface, tension simmered. Karen's absence from her own life was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of our community. It reminded us all of our own vulnerabilities, how easily the fabric of control could fray. Her punishment was self-inflicted, a silent protest against the universe's refusal to bend to her will. A week slipped by before the ripple effect truly began. Packages stacked up on her porch, a testament to a world she couldn't access. The sight of them was almost poetic, a visual metaphor for her isolation. I found myself wondering if she'd realized yet that the world spins on, indifferent to the personal vendettas we nurture. Then, one afternoon, just as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the street, it happened. The moment of high drama, where reality and irony collided. Karen appeared, her figure stark against the golden hue of dusk. She stood at the edge of her lawn, eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for a lost ship. Her movements were tentative, a woman unmoored. I held my breath, a spectator to her unraveling. The neighborhood seemed to pause, collective breath held in anticipation. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic, a reminder of a world still in motion. As her eyes met mine, an unspoken understanding passed between us, a recognition of the game we played, of the stakes we'd silently wagered. This was her reckoning, the moment where choice and consequence danced their inevitable waltz. Her face, usually a mask of smug superiority, softened briefly, as if acknowledging defeat. Then she turned, retreating back into her house, the door closing with a finality that echoed down the street. I lingered a moment longer, letting the satisfaction of justice served wash over me. The sun dipped below the horizon, and with it, Karen's brief reign faded into the obscurity of twilight. I stood, stretched, and smiled to myself, balance restored, for now. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting bars of light and shadow across the polished wood floor. It felt like the dawn of something new. The air was crisp with that unique blend of anticipation and resolution, the kind that comes after a storm has spent its last fury, and the world waits to see what remains. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring its warmth. There was something immensely satisfying about the simple act of holding a mug, its heat a reassuring presence in my hands. It reminded me of the control I had reclaimed, the peace I had carved out amidst chaos. Karen's reign of terror had unraveled, and all it took was a simple, bureaucratic glitch, a small nudge, really, to make her invisible, powerless. She'd tried to strip me of my right to a mailbox, to isolate me with petty rules and self-imposed authority. But she underestimated the quiet power of community and the mailman's unassuming schedule. When her mail stopped arriving, it was as if she became a ghost of her own making, howling unheard into the void. The days stretched into weeks, each one a masterpiece of irony. Her absence of mail turned her into a spectacle of impatience and frustration. Neighbors began to notice. They whispered in groups, subtle shakes of the head, understanding glances exchanged over dog walks and garden fences. There was a curious sense of equilibrium being restored, as if the neighborhood itself was rejecting her, an immune response to a foreign body. I watched as she floundered, her attempts at regaining control met with polite indifference. Her shrill demands, once sharp as knife edges, now blunted against the collective calm of a community that had tasted life without her intrusion. It was like watching a diva in an empty theater, playing to an audience that had long since departed. The mailman, a silent conspirator in this quiet rebellion, continued his route with meticulous precision, skipping her house with a consistency that was both deliberate and poetic. He never acknowledged our shared secret, only tipping his cap with a knowing smile as he passed. His actions spoke louder than any words could. Inside, a small part of me felt a pang of guilt. There was something deeply human in witnessing another's downfall, a reminder of our own fragility. But Karen had drawn those lines herself, spit vinegar into the well from which she now longed to drink. The neighborhood breathed easier, like a forest after a cleansing rain. Without her constant interference, we flourished, finding strength in our collective unity. Conversations grew softer, gardens greener, and the air seemed lighter than it had in years. It was as if we had all been given permission to exhale. And then, one morning, she was gone. A "for sale" sign appeared in her yard, its stark letters announcing the end of an era. Just like that, Karen vanished, leaving behind nothing but a ripple in the air and a host of lessons learned. I sat on my porch that evening, the world around me settling into a gentle twilight. The sky blushed with the promise of a new day, and I realized how much I had grown to love this place, these people. We were no longer strangers bound by proximity, but a community united by shared experience and a newfound resilience. As the stars began to prick the velvet sky, I raised my mug in silent salute. To the mailman, to the neighbors, to the quiet rebellion that had brought us here. The dance of light and shadow on the floor seemed to echo the balance restored within our lives. Karen had tried to wield her power like a scepter, only to find it crumble in her grasp. And in her absence, we discovered that the heart of our community beat stronger, its rhythm unbroken and true.